Draft in particular, limited formats in general, are really like sort of the flagship of Magic that a lot of people, I think, don't realize.
Distraction makers.
Since, I think, Outlaws of Thunder Junction, so only a few sets now, I've been primarily drafting on Magic Arena. That's been my main way of playing. I got tired of the same Golgari mid-range of Standard for the last 2 years.
Best of one?
Yeah, I think it might be my favorite way of playing Magic. Mm-hmm. And so I just wanted to come on here and have us gush about why not just draft, but all limited formats, in my opinion, I think they might be the best way of playing Magic. Before we start talking about limited formats and Magic the Gathering, give us a little like and subscribe and maybe a comment down below. Also, you can go and join the Discord. You can find a link down in the description below. And today's episode is brought to you by
My Game! Bullets and Teeth and Aliens is live on Kickstarter right now. It is a 2 to 5 player cooperative card game about blasting space bugs and getting paid. We just also added a bunch of new items to the Kickstarter. We added some play mats with my art on them, and we added a reprint of the first game. So if that sounds cool to you, you can find a link to the Kickstarter in the description below. Back to the video. Limited just means that instead of deck building before you come to the table to play, you're deck building at the table and then playing.
Right.
Where we have Draft, which is probably the most well-known version, where everybody's going to open 3 booster packs one at a time. You're going to choose one card from the booster pack. You're going to place it in front of you, and then you're going to pass the rest of that pack to the player to your left, go through 3 packs that way, and then eventually you build a deck. Yeah. Sealed, on the other hand, is the way that most pre-releases work, where you get 6 packs, you open those packs, and then you just build a deck out of that card pool. There's a couple other, maybe lesser-known versions of Limited in what's referred to as Cube, which is essentially players building their own set to draft with. It's almost like the ultimate in deck building, almost, where you're like building an entire set out of like cards you love, or maybe there's a theme. And then the final limited format that I think even less people know.
Honorable mention.
The honorable mention is Jumpstart, where you open 2 Jumpstart packs, which are specialized booster packs that are the cards are distributed differently in those packs than they are in regular booster packs. You open 2 Jumpstart packs, you shuffle them together, and that makes a deck.
Yeah,
and you just play.
Lands. It's 20 cards in each pack, so you get a 40 card deck. And each pack on the outside has like archetypes on them. So anyway, we'll talk about Jumpstart later. We'll get more into the details, but yeah.
So
really cool.
That's sort of like the generals of limited formats. So maybe we should talk about Draft in particular and what we think is so great about it.
To me, what I like about Draft, this is kind of like a general limited thing, but the fact that you, kind of everyone in a way is playing with a suboptimal version of a deck, I think is great, because I think that the variance in opening card packs for everyone around the table makes it so that everyone, it's technically not everyone is on a more level playing field. We can kind of talk about how like skill ceiling for Draft is very high.
Much higher, yeah.
Much higher than constructed.
Than even constructed formats, yeah.
Because having to decide what card to get out of each individual pack and create a deck out of this selection is just a very difficult thing to do.
It requires a ton of Magic knowledge in terms of like how to evaluate a card's strength, not only as an individual card, but also in context of the deck that you're building at the table.
And there's different heuristics for deck building in Draft than in constructed. And so you have to kind of know like, okay, well, this might be good in constructed, but how is this in Draft, and is this a good pick and stuff like that?
One of the most famous being 17 lands, which has even sort of been codified in its own website, but that's a whole nother conversation.
The old heuristic of you just play 17 lands in your deck, and that's what you do. The variance of having all these players around the table being able to kind of pick up cards sort of means that, like, in the same way that you open a booster pack and you might get a really, really good card, now you might get that really good card and someone else might not get that really good card. And the person that didn't get the really good card, they might be the better player, meaning that in the same way that Magic sort of has this level of variance and randomness in the deck, that makes for, we kind of talk about these like skill buckets and how players are getting closer and closer to being able to have more compelling gameplay with equal skill leveled players. Yeah. This sort of creates that at the deck construction level. So now someone that maybe is better at deck constructing, they could just get shit cards. I agree. I think that all helps sort of even the playing field a bit.
there's definitely a large skill component with draft. But it is definitely somewhat of an easier thing for players to get into, right? You're sitting out at the table, you're opening packs, and you're picking cards that you like. Like at its lowest skill floor mode, right? You're just going, okay, I just kind of think these cards go together, and that works.
It's a lot easier to just tell some player that doesn't know. Maybe they've played a game of Magic or two, right? But that doesn't really know much about deck construction because maybe they just have done pre-cons or whatever. To just tell them, like, just find 2 colors that it seems like you're seeing a lot of, pick those at the end, put in 17 lands, that's your deck, right? But when you're playing in something like Standard and you have to try and construct your own deck, right, it's way more convoluted. One, the possibility space of what cards to use is like, I don't know, 8x, like 10x. This, with draft, it's just one box. It's the one box of cards, the one set of cards that you have to pick from. So you'll probably see the same cards over and over again. And I feel like you only need to draft once or twice for you to then recognize cards and be like, oh, I remember that card. Yeah. That's a good card.
And ultimately, like, there is a pick order that emerges, right? And certain colors are stronger than others in any given draft format. But being able to draft sort of the most optimized deck just doesn't really happen. You end up like, okay, well, I have an idea of what the best thing to do is, but those cards aren't showing up to me. So what am I going to do to try to, weave into a different strategy that I think could still be successful?
And that's when I lose.
Right.
Yeah. When I have to do that, it's oof.
That's that skill
done.
ceiling,
yeah.
Right? It keeps getting taller.
That's like, no, I'm going green red from the very beginning. Why am I only getting the good blue cards now?
One rule of thumb, I guess another heuristic, that comes up in draft is what's called bread, which is bombs, removal, evasion, aggro, and then dregs, or I heard it as like duds, like just the extra junk. Yeah. And that's sort of the generic heuristic of pick order in draft. The other thing that I really like about draft in particular is that it feels like shines a spotlight on the set, right? Where you're going like, okay, I'm playing this specific set and I'm getting some of the story and the vibes of it because the cards are all obviously themed into that set. Like, if you're playing Bloomburrow and I'm drafting it, I'm really getting to see a lot of all of the cards of the set, right? I'm opening the packs, I'm seeing them, I'm choosing some of them. And sometimes I honestly think this ends up influencing Commander in some ways where players have like pet cards that they picked up during draft and they're like, I really wish I could play this in Constructed, but it's like not good enough to be played in like a competitive format. So then I think that's part of where Commander ended up emerging, which is like, oh, here's this draft chaff, as it's called, that has a home now. Maybe less the case now than what it used to be, but I think that was part of the original intention.
Yeah, I think to me, being a filthy casual for most of my life in trading card games is like draft is kind of how I imagine card games are supposed to be played. Not necessarily in sitting in a group of 8 people making your decks together, but making a sort of suboptimal deck while using the cards from the latest, most exciting set. That's kind of like my like imaginary version of what I expected TCGs to sort of be, right?
All of these cards can be played. Of course they can.
Right, yeah. We're all just hanging out, making this fun game more fun, right? And then I learn about Standard. And the thing that bums me out about like Standard in comparison to this is like when a new set comes out and I see like how it affects Standard, sometimes it doesn't really affect any sort of archetype of deck that might be out. And other times like 2-3 cards maybe that affects it.
Well, there's something that's a little weird with Standard, and I don't know if this still plays out the same way now as it used to, but when we used to be on the 2-year kind of rotation, is what would happen is you would have a powerful set, and then you'd have kind of an underpowered set maybe come out after it to kind of bring the power level of Standard back down.
Like the lightning bolt shock.
Yeah,
flow.
And then what ends up happening is like, okay, well, only 3 or so of those cards end up actually impacting any of the decks right now, but then when the rotation happens, now you have a new level of power as the Standard, which then ends up influencing like, oh, now those cards get their time to shine, which is great. Like it's a really good way to sort of turn over the soil of the format. So let's talk about sealed for a minute. I think we probably have a little bit less to say about sealed because it doesn't get played that often. Usually that's just a new set has come out, you're going to a pre-release and you play sealed. It definitely has a lower barrier to entry, I think, than draft does, where draft you're sort of, you have the anxiety of having to like pick the cards, where sealed it's like, here's just what you get. You still have to deck build. So there definitely is still that skill component there, but it definitely is more, I think, a bit more like play what you get kind of a format.
Yeah, I mean, my experience with sealed, I played a little bit of sealed on Magic Arena, but I played a ton of sealed Yu-Gi-Oh back in the day when I used to go to events for that. And yeah, I similar feelings that I have with draft of like celebrating this new set, being able to play with some of the new cards, making this sort of suboptimal deck that is not going to be the best, but might be able to do something. You get to see the new cards sort of interact with each other.
It really does feel like sort of the kickoff of the set. You know, usually sealed is played in a really low information environment where like nobody really knows what the good cards are yet.
Yeah.
And so
that's true.
It helps you to kind of get over that hurdle, I think. So Cube, we definitely want to spend some time with it, and probably I'm sure it's worth at least a video of its own, if not more. We're getting there.
Cube feels like the natural conclusion that you come to if you are somewhat interested in design and Magic.
Yeah,
right.
It does.
Like,
it definitely feels like a stepping stone.
You are tired of Standard and the rotation. You don't want to play Commander because it's a broken game. You're tired of Draft because you just think that they don't know how to design the game anymore or whatever. So instead, you're like, well, I'm going to design my own ideal Draft format out of this cube.
Or it's that you just want to experience cards from the past.
or it's nostalgia. Yeah.
Could be that.
Yeah, could be a bit of that.
All right, so the last limited format to discuss is Jumpstart. And I think this one really gets missed by most players, I think.
I don't know why people don't talk about it more.
I think it's really interesting. It's like such a fascinating idea of like the smallest kernel of Magic, right? Like how do we get players to immediately get playing, immediately understand booster packs, immediately understand how a trading card game works, and also start them, like kick them off with a bit of a collection that can be customized and turned into all kinds of different stuff. I feel like Jumpstart could almost be its own game. Like,
I mean, it's funny because we talked about like Jumpstart is like one step closer to TCG than Keyforge. Yeah. So Keyforge, you can't mix and match your deck, but you get a booster pack of a deck. So like you can play right away, you just can't customize it. So Jumpstart being like, well, no, you can customize these later. So if you want to just buy a box because there's some cards that are unique to Jumpstart, you can do that. But if you're a new player, you can get 2 packs, combine them together, and you feel like you have a little bit more ownership or agency because you get to decide like, oh, well, I pick the vampire pack and the zombie pack, and I'm going to play vampire zombies.
And I think it at least gives you the beginnings of sort of an identity of a deck or identity of theme. I don't think it quite gets to the same levels like a pre-con, but it definitely is like a great place for players to enter into the game, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, cool. So what are some of our, I guess, design takeaways from limited formats?
To me, rotatable format, long form sort of rotatable formats like we might see with Standard or even especially Eternal formats have all sorts of problems. And the thing that I really like about this, it's this sort of agreed upon like cycle. It's like a socially accepted rotation, right? It's like this is the game this time around, which is so wild to me that it's just kind of accepted and it's the norm like that. But I think that it's cool because you get to actually see the individual mechanics at play. And I mean, that doesn't necessarily touch so much on Cube, right? Because Cube is sort of your own handcrafted thing. Being able to actually see the individual set as like a celebration of it, I think it's just really cool. And I think it's the only way you really get that.
It's like a new game every time.
Yeah.
Literally, right? It's like, it's still Magic, but this is the version of Magic.
This is the new way of playing this.
You know, a little cube of the new version of Magic almost. One of the most interesting things about limited formats is it feels like it helps to justify the TCG model of booster packs and like the distribution of randomized, like the randomized distribution that TCGs use, where if you don't have sort of like a gameplay reason to distribute game pieces that way, you kind of end up in weird predatory monetization territory. Where I think it becomes more justified when it's presented in a way that's playable.
Right. I mean, we just had a whole video about this where we kind of were talking about this a little bit and like, is this the future of TCGs? Do all TCGs need to have a draft format? And kind of the soft conclusion we came to, I guess, was like, yeah, if there's no really game system reason for you to have randomized cards within your booster pack, then yeah, you're essentially just creating a loot box at that point.
Well, you can kind of see it in the two different booster packs that there are now, where you've got like the play booster, right? Is that what it's called now?
Play
set. No, one of those are gone now.
Oh.
It's just 2 boosters now, right? I think it's like you have the draft booster and then you have the collector booster. I don't know. I don't remember anymore, but what I mean is that there's a collector booster that is meant to be opened like a lottery ticket, right? Where the actual boosters that you use to play draft, whatever they're called now, those are more for actually playing the game, which, I guess those are both parts of a trading card game. What are you going to do?
I think it's good to have people that are interested in the collector's items. I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. And I think that if there are players that are interested in the collection aspect, it obviously, it's money for the company, but more money for the company, more opportunities and product and games for us.
Well, it's also definitely a way to support game stores. The secondary market does really help with making sure there's places to play the game. So things to keep in mind. Anyway, one thing that you mentioned, and I was just thinking about that I think helps with the sort of rotation thing that's happening with draft, is that the game pieces themselves, when you're playing limited, feel so much less sort of valuable because a lot of them are draft chaff, right? You're playing with these game pieces that are less expensive, and so when they sort of rotate, you're not really even thinking about them because most of them aren't worth anything anyway. And I do think that there's a component, a connection between the cost of a deck and a rotating format, and that if the cost of a deck, just sort of the cost of entry to play, is too high, I think players really are like, how dare you get rid of my cards? I mean, we really just saw a huge amount of backlash with the commander bans that I think has a similar vibe, right? That obviously anybody making death threats is a total idiot and they shouldn't do that, but that frustration is there, and it is that rotation is sort of a way to ban cards almost, right, on a schedule. And so, when the cards aren't worth anything, I don't think anybody pays that much attention.
Nobody really cares. But then at the same time, I think how many times can you do that before you look at your whole box and collection of all this old draft chaff that you have, and you're like, I'm
gonna make a cube.
Right? Yeah. Then I guess you decide to make a cube at that point. Yeah.
I really miss Ravnica. I'm gonna make a Ravnica cube.
I think what's cool about it though, about the drafting in that way, is it's the only time that you actually really look at the commons.
A lot of them.
There's even uncommons a lot of the times. You're just kind of like, what's in here? What's the new counter spell or burn spell? I don't know. Is it this? But yeah, being able to actually look at this and remember, I can remember certain uncommons from the sets that I played in Bloomburrow and Outlaws and stuff like that, and be like, yeah, that was a good card. Now I'll see it in Commander and be like, that card fucking sucks.
It's terrible. Yeah. I do think that the peak of my Magic memorization knowledge was when I was drafting the most, because it's just you get exposed to way more random cards.
I think ultimately what we're touching on here though is that there's something really, really cool about when there's this agreed upon, I don't know what else, delusion, we'll call it a delusion, that the game has to have this random element to it, right? And that having to make a suboptimal thing, right, means that, and having it rotate, means that you are always having to sort of change and differ your build, right? And I think that you get more replay value out of that. I mean, there's only so many times that I'm going to make aggro red in a best of one game on Arena, and I'm just going to play that to the top, right? You'll get bored after a while. But I think with draft, even after doing it many times, you get that exciting moment from opening a booster, seeing a really cool card and being like, oh, I get to use that card in this deck this time. That's really cool. And I feel like that doesn't really go away, or it takes a long time, right? You have to kind of not be interested in the draft set, or maybe you just play it too many times before you just really get tired of that.
Yeah, it definitely also feels just like draft in particular, limited formats in general, are really like sort of the flagship of Magic, that a lot of people I think don't realize, that like this feels like the first wave of any given set is that it's the draft experience. Yeah. And then out of the draft experience is the standard experience, and then sort of the modern or commander and more eternal formats. And that's kind of the flow I think that we go through.
Yeah.
Where that's sort of like, okay, well, if you're going to experience a set in its totality, limited formats are where you do that.
Right.